Imagine a map of the world. Now, imagine a single thread of power that starts in the year 1299 and doesn't snap until the end of World War I. For 6 centuries, one family, one name, and one empire stood at the crossroads of human history. They were the bridge between the East and the West, the gatekeepers of the Silk Road, and the shadow that haunted the dreams of European kings for generations. At its height, this empire breathed across 3 continents. It stretched from the gates of Vienna to the sands of the Persian Gulf, from the jagged peaks of the Caucasus to the scorching coast of North Africa. They called it the Sublime State. We know it as the Ottoman Empire. But before the gilded palaces of Istanbul, before the terror of the Janissaries, and before the world-shaking fall of Constantinople, there was only a man, a horse, and a dream in the dirt. The story begins in the late 13th century, in a land that felt like the end of the world. Anatolia, modern-day Turkey, was a fractured, bleeding landscape. The great Seljuk Empire, once a titan of the Islamic world, had been shattered by the Mongol hammer. What was left was a chaotic patchwork of tiny, bickering tribal lordships called beyliks. To the west lay the fading, ghost-like remnant of the Byzantine Empire, clinging to its ancient walls. To the east, the terrifying shadow of the Mongol Ilkhanate. In this vacuum of power, a small tribe of nomadic horsemen called the Kayi wandered the frontier. They were refugees, pushed westward by the Mongol tide, looking for a place to breathe. Their leader was a man named Ertugrul, but it was his son, Osman, who would change the world. Osman wasn't born in a palace. He was born in a tent. He grew up with the smell of damp wool, the rhythm of migrating herds, and the constant cold weight of a sword at his hip. He was a Ghazi, a frontier warrior. Legend tells of Osman's dream. One night, while staying at the house of a holy man, he fell into a deep sleep. He saw a crescent moon rising from the chest of his host and entering his own. Then, a massive tree sprouted from his navel, its branches covering the entire world: the Caucasus, the Atlas Mountains, the Taurus, and the Balkans. When he woke, he knew. He wasn't just a tribal chief. He was the seed of a world-shaking dynasty. But dreams don't pay for soldiers, and visions don't break stone walls. Osman's early years were a brutal, grinding struggle for survival. He had to convince his own stubborn tribesmen that they were more than just nomads. He started small, a watchtower here, a mountain pass there. He used a tactic that would become the Ottoman trademark. He didn't just conquer people, he absorbed them. He welcomed disgruntled Byzantine knights and local peasants tired of high taxes. For years, Osman's eyes were fixed on the city of Bursa, a vital Byzantine silk trading hub. For nearly a decade, the Ottomans surrounded the city, living in the hills and waiting. In 1326, the city finally surrendered, but Osman never got to walk through its gates. As the city officials handed over the keys, Osman lay dying in his tent, his body spent from decades in the saddle. His final wish to his son, Orhan, was simple: bury me in Bursa, make it the capital, and never stop moving toward the sunset. Osman died as a tribal lord, but he left behind a principality with a destiny. His son Orhan took those keys and did the unthinkable. He crossed the water. In 1354, a massive earthquake shattered the walls of Gallipoli, a Byzantine fortress on the European side of the Dardanelles. While the Greeks fled in terror, thinking it was divine wrath, the Ottomans saw it as a divine invitation. They crossed the strait and occupied the ruins. For the first time, the Ottomans had a foothold in Europe. The Christian world finally woke up, realizing that if they didn't act, the Turk would swallow the Balkans. They called for crusades, gathering the finest knights of Hungary, France, and Germany to push these upstarts back into the desert. But the Ottomans were no longer just a tribe. They were becoming a machine. Every predator faces a moment where it almost becomes the prey. And in the early 1400s, the empire nearly vanished. A terrifying warlord from Central Asia, Timur the Lame, crushed the Ottoman army and took the Sultan prisoner. The empire spiraled into a decade of civil war, brother against brother. Most historians would have written their obituary then. But the Ottomans had built something deeper than a family tree. They had built a system. They had created the Janissaries. Imagine a corps of elite soldiers who owned nothing but their swords. They were the new soldiers, taken as young boys from Christian villages, converted and trained with a monastic, brutal discipline. They were the Sultan's slaves, but they were also the most powerful men in the empire. With this professional spine, the empire didn't just recover, it exploded. By 1451, a young man named Mehmed II took the throne. At 19, the world saw a boy. Mehmed saw a destiny. He was obsessed with the one city his ancestors had failed to take 20 times: Constantinople. For 1,000 years, Constantinople had been the queen of cities, protected by the Theodosian walls, miles of triple-layered stone that had broken every army. To Mehmed, it was an insult. The siege of 1453 was a collision of two eras. On one side, the Byzantines stood with ancient Greek fire. On the other, Mehmed brought the future. Gunpowder. He commissioned a cannon so massive it fired stone balls weighing 1,200 pounds. But the walls held. The Byzantines had stretched a massive iron chain across the harbor, making it impossible for the Ottoman navy to enter. Then, Mehmed did the impossible. In a single night, he ordered his soldiers to build a road of greased logs over the rugged hills, bypassing the chain entirely. Under the cover of darkness, the Ottomans literally pulled their entire fleet out of the water, over the mountains, and slid them back into the harbor behind the enemy's back. On May 29, 1453, the final assault began. The Janissaries moved forward in a silent, terrifying wall of steel. The walls were finally breached, the Middle Ages were over, and the upstart Ottomans were now the heirs to the Roman Empire. The empire reached its absolute zenith under Suleiman the Magnificent, or as his own people called him, the lawgiver. Suleiman was the ultimate philosopher king, ruling over 25 million people. His armies crushed the Hungarian nobility at the Battle of Mohacs in just 2 hours, and the world held its breath as Ottoman tents appeared outside the walls of Vienna. If Vienna fell, the road to Paris was open. Suleiman created a legal code so advanced it stayed in place for 300 years. He was the most powerful man on the planet, a poet who wrote under a pseudonym, and a lover who broke all tradition by marrying his concubine, Roxolana. But as the empire touched the clouds, the air began to get thin. The Ottoman system was built on a terrifying premise. For the empire to live, the Sultan had to be absolute. There could be no rivals, not even from his own blood. As Suleiman grew older, the very walls of the palace began to feel like a cage. To ensure stability, he executed his most capable son, Mustafa, based on harem conspiracies. It was a moment that broke the Ottoman heart. For the first time, the sublime state began to prioritize survival over brilliance. Inside the palace walls, a darker tradition took root: the law of fratricide. To prevent civil war, it became expected for a new sultan to execute all his brothers. While a new king was crowned amidst gold, 19 small coffins would be carried out the back gate in a silent procession. By the early 1600s, they tried to be more humane, creating the cafés, or the cage. luxury apartments where royal heirs were kept in total isolation for decades. The result was catastrophic. Men were pulled out of these cages at age 40 to rule an empire of millions, having never seen the sun. They were broken and often insane, manipulated by court eunuchs and powerful mothers. While leadership rotted, the world was changing. European explorers found a way around the Ottoman-controlled Silk Road by sailing across the Atlantic. Suddenly, the gold of the Americas was bypassing Ottoman ports. The most dangerous rot, however, was in the Janissaries. These elite soldiers realized they were the true kingmakers. They stopped training and started politicking, becoming a mafia in uniform that would overturn their soup cauldrons in mutiny whenever a sultan tried to reform. In 1683, the empire gambled everything on one final throw of the dice, a second march on Vienna. Grand Vizier Kara Mustafa Pasha led 150,000 men to the gates. Vienna was on its knees, days away from starvation. But Kara Mustafa was arrogant, failing to protect his rear. On September 12th, the King of Poland, Jan Sobieski, led 18,000 winged hussars, thundering down the mountainside in the largest cavalry charge in human history. The Ottoman lines evaporated. The defeat at Vienna wasn't just a lost battle. It was the moment the myth of Ottoman invincibility died. For the next 2 centuries, the empire entered a long, agonizing retreat. They were no longer the predators. They were the sick man of Europe. By the dawn of the 20th century, the sublime state was a fractured, debt-ridden giant. In 1908, a revolution by the Young Turks stripped the Sultan of his power, seeking a constitution and a modern identity. But the dream of a multi-ethnic paradise died in the trenches of the Balkans as the empire shrank and radicalized. Then came 1914, the Great War. It was the ultimate trap. Fearing Russia, the Ottoman leadership allied with Germany. The war was a 4-year agony. In the Caucasus, tens of thousands of Ottoman soldiers froze to death in a single night. In the south, the Arab Revolt, fueled by British gold, tore the Middle East away. Amidst this panic, the empire's dark side turned inward. In 1915, the government began the forced deportation and massacre of its Armenian population, a tragedy that left a permanent, bleeding scar on history. Yet, even in its death throes, the lion had one last roar. At Gallipoli, the British and French navies tried to force their way to Istanbul. They expected an easy victory against the sick man. Instead, they met a wall of fire led by a brilliant young colonel named Mustafa Kemal. The Ottoman soldiers defended their soil with their lives, winning a victory that would become the foundation of a new national pride. But one victory couldn't stop history. In 1918, the war ended. Foreign warships sat in the harbor, their guns pointed at the Sultan's palace. The heartland of Anatolia was being carved up by the Greeks, Italians, and French. It was the end. But from the ashes, Mustafa Kemal emerged. He shed his Ottoman uniform and led a miraculous war of independence. He didn't want to save the Sultan. He wanted to save the Turks. In 1922, the Sultanate was abolished. On a cold November morning, Mehmed VI, the last Sultan of the House of Osman, walked out of a side door of the palace with a single suitcase and vanished into exile. The Ottoman Empire didn't just end, it transformed. Its legacy is written into the borders of every country in the Middle East and the architecture of the Balkans. They were the bridge between worlds, a dynasty that outlasted the Romans and the Byzantines, proving that power is a cycle of breath, inhaling the world and exhaling history. As the fog rolls in over the Bosporus today, the ghosts of the sultans still seem to watch the water, reminding us that nothing, not even a state that calls itself eternal, lasts forever. But they also remind us that when a giant falls, the earth shakes for centuries to come. The sword of a sultan can conquer the world, but only the memory of his people can keep the empire alive. For in the end, we do not inherit the land from our ancestors. We only borrow the dust until the next story begins.